You think you learned all of Grandma's best recipes? Think again. She took secrets to her grave, Christmas dishes measured by feel, tasted by memory, and never written down. Let's dig into 2 hours of 60 vintage Christmas recipes you'll wish Grandma taught you sooner. Glazed ham studded with cloves and pineapple was the Christmas centerpiece that required hours of careful basting and patience. Whole bone-in hams were scored in diamond patterns, each intersection receiving a whole clove that would perfume the meat during cooking. Pineapple rings were pinned on with toothpicks, and maraschino cherries filled the centers, creating a retro but genuinely impressive appearance. The glaze combined brown sugar, mustard, and pineapple juice, brushed on repeatedly during roasting until it formed a mahogany coating that was simultaneously sweet, tangy, and slightly spicy. The meat underneath stayed moist and flavorful, the fat rendering into the glaze while the cloves infused subtle warmth throughout. In mid-century American homes, this ham represented prosperity and celebration, something families saved for Christmas Day when company would see and admire the presentation. Carving revealed pink meat glistening with glaze, and leftovers lasted for days, making sandwiches and casseroles. Today's simpler preparations miss the visual drama and layered flavors that made this ham unforgettable. Molasses taffy pull was not just a recipe. It was a ritual of laughter and warmth that filled the long winter nights of the 1800s. Families would gather in the kitchen as the syrup boiled thick and dark, the scent of sugar and smoke curling into the rafters. Once the mixture was poured out to cool, the real fun began. Buttered hands pulling and stretching the golden ribbons until they turned pale and glossy. It was sticky work, but it brought people together in a way no store-bought candy could. Children giggled as strands tangled between their fingers, and adults swapped stories as they twisted the soft candy into ropes. When finished, the taffy was cut, wrapped in bits of wax paper, and shared as tokens of love. It was both a dessert and a memory-making event, a celebration of patience and play. Today, few kitchens see such scenes, but if you've ever pulled a strand of warm sugar by hand, you know it's more than candy. It's connection. Old-fashioned fruitcake loaf was one of Betty Crocker's most persistent holiday recommendations, a dense loaf packed with candied fruit nut spices and warm winter aroma. It was mixed, slowly baked carefully, and cooled fully before slicing, sometimes wrapped and stored for days to deepen the flavor. For many families, it became a gifting tradition because the loaf traveled well and symbolized care and effort. The colors of red, green, and gold fruit pieces made each slice look festive, even if the flavor was richer than modern tastes prefer. Fruitcake slowly faded from popularity, but older generations remembered its place on Christmas tables and its importance in holiday sharing. In Betty Crocker's cookbooks, it stood as a symbol of patience, tradition, and the belief that some desserts were meant to last beyond a single day. Pork backbone and dumplings was Christmas comfort food that transformed butchering remnants into soul-warming celebration. The backbone, cut from hogs during December slaughter, was meaty enough to flavor broth but cheap enough for everyday tables. The bones simmered for hours with onions and black pepper until meat fell away tender. Then dumplings were dropped into bubbling broth. Flour, lard, and buttermilk rolled thin and cut into strips. They puffed up while cooking, absorbing rich pork flavor and creating thickness. In rural communities throughout the South, backbone and dumplings meant Christmas thrift elevated to tradition. Families gathered around steaming pots, spooning dumplings and tender pork into bowls. This wasn't fancy food, but it was deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that warmed you from inside while snow fell outside. The dumplings were tender and rich, the pork sweet and falling apart soft. This represented mountain Christmas, making celebration from what you had, turning necessity into tradition passed through generations. Creamed celery was the sophisticated cousin of other creamed vegetables, turning the overlooked stalk into something worthy of fine china and silver spoons. Cooks sliced celery on the diagonal and simmered it until tender, then folded it into rich white sauce enriched with cream and butter. Seasonings were delicate: white pepper, a touch of nutmeg, perhaps parsley for color. The celery retained gentle crunch even in the sauce, providing textural interest other creamed vegetables lacked. This was a dish for formal dinners and holiday gatherings, its mild elegance complementing rather than competing with richer offerings. Pale green and white colors added sophistication to tables heavy with browns. Some cooks topped creamed celery with toasted almonds, creating a gratin that bordered on indulgent. The dish required fresh celery at its crispest, making winter holidays the perfect occasion. Creamed celery has virtually disappeared from modern menus, a casualty of changing tastes that forgot how refined simple vegetables could become. Charlotte Russe was the elegant Christmas dessert that arrived in individual servings, each one a small tower of Bavarian cream surrounded by ladyfingers and topped with whipped cream. The dessert required patience and skill. The cream filling had to be made from scratch, cooked custard folded with whipped cream and set with gelatin until it held its shape. Ladyfingers were arranged around the inside of molds, standing upright like soldiers guarding the creamy center. Once unmolded, the charlottes looked like something from a French pastry shop, impossibly refined for home kitchens. Families served them at Christmas dinner parties where impressing guests mattered. The cream was delicate, barely sweet, flavored with vanilla or sometimes a splash of rum. Each spoonful combined the soft cookie texture of ladyfingers with the airy richness of the filling. Charlotte Russe represented the height of homemade elegance, proof that American cooks could match European sophistication when the occasion demanded their finest efforts. Liver and onions appeared on Christmas tables when the luxury cuts went to wealthier customers. The organ meat sold for pennies to families who knew how to make it delicious. Liver was soaked in milk to remove any bitterness, then sliced thin and dredged in seasoned flour before frying in hot fat until crispy outside but still pink within. Onions fried alongside turned sweet and caramelized, their flavor balancing the liver's mineral richness. The combination was served over mashed potatoes or with bread to soak up the pan drippings that carried concentrated flavor. Children either loved or hated liver, but parents served it knowing the iron and vitamins it provided were essential for growing bodies during lean times. Liver and onions cost a fraction of steak, but delivered more nutrition per bite. The dish represented practical eating, the understanding that organ meat sustained life as effectively as the muscle cuts that cost far more. Baked ham with pineapple rings and maraschino cherries was the iconic centerpiece that defined American Christmas through the 1960s and 70s. The ham, usually a bone-in shank or butt portion, was scored in diamond patterns, each intersection studded with a whole clove that released fragrance as it baked. Canned pineapple rings were arranged across the surface and secured with toothpicks, a bright red cherry placed in each ring's center. Brown sugar and mustard glaze was brushed over everything, caramelizing into sticky sweetness that dripped down the sides. The presentation was unmistakably festive, the ham gleaming amber and gold under dining room lights. Slicing revealed pink meat with that distinctive ham flavor that paired perfectly with sweet glaze. Families served this alongside scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, and dinner rolls. The pineapple cherry ham has become a punchline today, dismissed as kitschy, but for millions it represented Christmas abundance and maternal love. Chestnut stuffing made from fresh chestnuts was the Christmas side dish that required patience, but delivered unmatched flavor and texture. Fresh chestnuts were scored with an axe, roasted until the shells split, then peeled while still hot to remove both outer shell and inner skin. The tender nuts were chopped and mixed with bread cubes, sautéed celery and onions, sage, butter, and broth, creating stuffing that was simultaneously hearty and delicate. The chestnuts added sweetness and meaty texture that no other ingredient could replicate, transforming ordinary stuffing into something genuinely special. The preparation was labor-intensive, with burns from hot shells considered inevitable, but the result justified the effort. In European and American traditions, chestnut stuffing represented Christmas luxury and the proper way to honor roasted birds. Street vendors sold roasted chestnuts throughout winter, making them associated with holiday celebration and cold weather comfort. Modern versions using canned chestnuts miss the subtle char and sweetness of fresh roasted nuts. This stuffing once defined Christmas dinner sophistication, proving that some traditions require genuine work and dedication. Fruitcake icebox cookies were the quieter cousin of the famous fruitcake, but in many kitchens, they were even more beloved. These cookies required no baking at all, just crushed graham crackers, condensed milk, and bits of candied fruit mixed together and chilled until firm. The recipe was the perfect solution for busy homemakers balancing work, family, and a holiday meal that needed to stretch far. Each bite tasted like nostalgia, soft, chewy, and filled with the flavors of spice and sugar that marked the season. They were stored in tins or waxed paper and handed out with care, the kind of treat that improved with time. Fruitcake icebox cookies proved that you did not need an oven to make something that tasted like Christmas. They were quick, clever, and comforting, a glimpse into an age where every ingredient mattered and every crumb carried love. Today, they have all but vanished, replaced by store-bought trays and glossy desserts. But somewhere, a grandmother still remembers how the kitchen smelled when the first batch set in the cold. Though modern tastes have shifted away from such spreads, the old cookbooks preserve its place as a symbol of holiday hospitality. It remains a snapshot of a time when Christmas parties revolved around carefully arranged trays, small bites, and the belief that every guest should feel pampered, even with budget-friendly recipes. Holiday cheese ball with pimiento was once a Christmas essential displayed proudly on appetizer tables and party buffets in countless Betty Crocker holiday guides. The mixture blended cream cheese, cheddar, pimiento, and seasonings into a smooth, moldable mixture that was shaped by hand and rolled in chopped nuts for texture. Served with crackers, celery sticks, or bread rounds, the cheese ball brought color flavor and a sense of fun to the holiday spread. It captured the mid-century love of molded foods, foods that were shaped, sculpted, dressed, and decorated for special occasions. The cheese ball was simple, affordable, and endlessly adaptable, making it a favorite among hostesses who wanted something reliable yet festive. Over the decades, it faded as tastes shifted toward fresher, lighter holiday foods, but vintage photos still show it shining beneath tinsel garlands and brass candlesticks. It was a symbol of celebration built from pantry staples and Betty Crocker's message that holiday magic could be made from anything when handled with pride. Chestnut soup with bacon was Christmas' first course that captured forest bounty and smokehouse richness. Wild chestnuts gathered in fall were roasted, peeled, and simmered until soft enough to puree. The resulting soup was thickened with cream when available, or milk when not, creating velvety texture. Crispy bacon crumbled on top added saltiness and crunch that complemented chestnut sweetness. In Appalachian communities, chestnut soup represented Christmas before the blight destroyed American chestnuts, marking this as truly forgotten food. The soup was elegant despite humble ingredients, its nutty sweetness unlike anything modern. Served hot in bowls, it warmed bodies preparing for larger Christmas meal to follow. The bacon provided savory contrast while adding necessary fat. This was mountain sophistication, wild food prepared with technique that created restaurant-quality results, proving rural cooks understood refinement even when cooking from forest and farm. Oyster stew appeared on Christmas Eve tables across America, a tradition combining simplicity with subtle luxury during the holiday season. The dish required nothing more than fresh oysters, butter, milk or cream, and careful attention to timing. Overcook the oysters and they turned rubbery, undercook them, and flavor stayed hidden. Cooks heated milk gently, added butter until it melted into golden pools, then slipped in oysters and their precious liquor just long enough for edges to curl. Salt, pepper, and perhaps Worcestershire completed the seasoning. The stew was ladled into warm bowls, each serving containing several plump oysters swimming in rich, briny broth. Oyster crackers floated on top, adding crunch to each spoonful. The tradition had practical origins. Catholics abstained from meat on Christmas Eve, making seafood the natural choice. But the stew also symbolized abundance, a moment of quiet celebration before the feast to come. Families passed this custom through generations, the simple bowl becoming sacred ritual. Fried mush appeared on Christmas morning tables when the budget allowed nothing fancier. The humble cornmeal transformed through a 2-day process into something crispy and satisfying. The day before, cornmeal was cooked into thick porridge, then poured into loaf pans and chilled until firm enough to slice. Christmas morning, the slices were fried in bacon fat or lard until golden and crispy on both sides, then served with molasses, syrup, or whatever sweetener the pantry held. The contrast between crispy exterior and creamy interior made each bite interesting, and the corn flavor was comforting and familiar. Fried mush required almost no expense. Cornmeal was the cheapest grain, and the cooking fat came from previous meals. The dish represented the ingenuity of poor cooks who knew that texture and technique could elevate even the most basic ingredients into something worth serving on Christmas morning. Creamed spinach was the emerald green side dish that proved vegetables could be just as indulgent as any main course, its velvety texture and subtle flavor pleasing even spinach skeptics. Fresh spinach was washed thoroughly, wilted in butter, then combined with a rich bechamel sauce flavored with nutmeg and sometimes a touch of garlic. The finished dish was deep green and creamy, each bite smooth and satisfying. Steakhouses made creamed spinach famous, but home cooks recreated it for Christmas dinners when only the finest sides would do. The dish required fresh spinach. Frozen wouldn't achieve the same texture. And careful attention to the sauce. Families served it in small portions, understanding its richness. Creamed spinach represented the era's appreciation for technique over convenience, when vegetable dishes were crafted rather than simply steamed. It has largely disappeared from home cooking, surviving mainly in upscale restaurants. Candied citrus peel dipped in chocolate was the Christmas confection that transformed waste into luxury treats. Orange, lemon, and grapefruit peels were simmered in sugar syrup multiple times until they became translucent and tender, absorbing sweetness while losing bitterness. Once dried, the strips were dipped in tempered dark chocolate and left to set. The result was sophisticated candy with intense citrus flavor, chewy texture, and chocolate richness. In European traditions brought to America, candied peel represented thrift and skill, using what others discarded to create something genuinely delicious. The preparation required patience and attention, with multiple cooking and drying stages spread over days. Families made these during December, storing them in tins for gifting and serving. The combination of bitter peel, concentrated sweetness, and dark chocolate created complex flavor that appealed to adult palates. Today's preference for simple sweets means candied peel has nearly vanished, but it once demonstrated how proper technique elevated humble ingredients into Christmas elegance. Boiled custard was the quiet forerunner to eggnog, a drinkable dessert that once marked the start of every Southern Christmas gathering. It was rich, silky, and just thick enough to coat the spoon, made from milk, sugar, and eggs whisked gently over low heat until the kitchen filled with the sweet scent of vanilla and cream. Families served it chilled in tall glasses, often dusted with nutmeg or topped with a dollop of whipped cream. Before eggnog's spiced boldness stole the spotlight, boiled custard was the holiday's truest comfort. Simple, pure, and patient. Children sipped it alongside cookies, while adults added a splash of whiskey or rum for warmth. It was a dessert to linger over, slow and soothing, like a lullaby in liquid form. There was no rush in making it. Curdled eggs meant you had hurried, and haste was the enemy of good cooking. Today, few take the time to stir a custard by hand, but those who do say the first spoonful still feels like Christmas morning in a glass. Golden squash pie was the mid-century alternative to pumpkin pie when winter squash was cheaper, easier to store, or more available. Betty Crocker offered versions that used mashed squash blended with spices, milk, and eggs to create a smooth custard filling glowing a deeper gold than traditional pumpkin. The pie baked into a warm, sweet, earthy dessert that tasted familiar yet slightly richer. Families made it when budgets were tight or when gardens produced more squash than anything else, making it a practical but delicious holiday choice. The filling held a natural sweetness that felt comforting after long, cold weeks, and the color brought brightness to winter tables. Slices disappeared quickly because the flavor surprised people every time, reminding them that simple ingredients could still feel festive. Spring roll cookies pressed with carved molds were the anise-flavored Christmas tradition that turned cookie making into folk art. The dough was simple but precise, requiring beaten eggs, sugar, and flour in exact proportions, then flavored heavily with anise oil or extract. Once mixed, the dough was rolled smooth and pressed with intricate wooden molds carved with Christmas scenes, animals, flowers, or religious imagery. Each cookie carried detailed impressions that would remain through baking. The cookies were left to dry overnight before baking at low temperature, creating a distinctive white appearance and rock-hard texture when fresh. Stored in tins with anise seeds, they slowly softened into tender cookies with intense licorice flavor that either enchanted or repelled. In German and Swiss communities, spring roll represented heritage and artistry, with antique molds passed through generations. The preparation required time and proper technique, making these cookies about tradition more than convenience. Today, they remain niche specialties, but they once adorned Christmas tables across European American households every December. Carrot copper pennies were a make-ahead marvel that freed Christmas cooks from last-minute vegetable preparation. Carrots were sliced into thin coins, blanched until tender, then marinated for days in a tangy sauce of tomato soup, oil, vinegar, and Worcestershire sauce. The coins absorbed the bright orange-red marinade until they glistened like polished copper. Green bell pepper rings and sliced onions joined the carrots, adding color contrast and crunch. What made copper pennies invaluable was their timing. They actually improved with age, developing deeper flavor after 3 or 4 days in the refrigerator. Busy hostesses could prepare them the weekend before Christmas, freeing precious hours on the holiday itself. Served cold straight from the jar, they required no reheating or fussing. The dish appeared at church potlucks and family gatherings throughout the season. Carrot copper pennies proved that practical cooking could also be delicious, a lesson in efficiency that modern meal preppers have rediscovered. Popcorn balls were the Christmas treats that appeared at holiday parties and hung from trees as edible decorations, spheres of popped corn held together with molasses or sugar syrup. The process required freshly popped corn, no kernels, no old maids, mixed quickly with hot syrup before the mixture cooled and became unworkable. Cooks buttered their hands and shaped the sticky mass into balls, while heat made their palms tingle. Some recipes used molasses for dark, chewy popcorn balls. Others used clear sugar syrup for lighter versions that sparkled. Red food coloring made festive Christmas balls, while green created holiday trees when molded into cone shapes. The treats were wrapped in cellophane and tied with ribbons for gifting or display. Children helped make popcorn balls, learning to work quickly and tolerate sticky fingers. The tradition connected Christmas to harvest abundance, corn being the American grain. Though commercial versions exist today, homemade popcorn balls carried the warmth of kitchens and hands that shaped them. Wild greens mess with ham hock was Christmas side that brought spring preservation to winter table. In spring, mountain families gathered wild greens, poke, lamb's quarters, dandelion, and canned them for winter. By Christmas, these jars represented summer work and wild food knowledge. The greens were cooked long and slow with smoked ham hock until tender and richly flavored. The pot liquor was savory and nourishing, meant to be sopped up with cornbread. In Appalachian communities, wild greens meant Christmas connection to land and seasons. Proving celebration included foods gathered free from hillsides. The greens were slightly bitter, balanced by ham's saltiness and smokiness. This was nutrition and tradition combined, teaching children that Christmas abundance came from knowing land and being willing to work hard, preserving what nature provided freely to those with knowledge and respect. Salmon patties became Christmas dinner when canned fish provided the only affordable protein. The pink cakes fried until crispy and served with gravy or alongside vegetables from the cellar. Canned salmon was mixed with crushed crackers or breadcrumbs, egg to bind, and onion for flavor, then shaped into patties and fried in hot fat until golden on both sides. The fish's distinctive flavor came through despite the additions, each patty delivering protein that fresh fish would have cost too much to provide. Families served salmon patties with white gravy made from the pan drippings, stretching the meal further while adding richness. The cans themselves were saved and repurposed, Nothing wasted in households where every resource mattered. Salmon patties represented accessibility, the ability to serve fish for Christmas dinner regardless of geography or income. The dish proved that celebration didn't require fresh ingredients, just skill in preparing what was affordable. Relish trays were the colorful appetizer platters that greeted guests before Christmas dinner, their compartments filled with pickles, olives, and crisp vegetables. Cut glass divided dishes held sweet gherkins, stuffed green olives, black olives, celery sticks, carrot curls, and radish roses carved by patient hands. The presentation was meant to impress, each vegetable cut precisely and arranged with care. Children were allowed to graze from relish trays while adults prepared the main meal, keeping small hands busy and appetites partially satisfied. Making radish roses and celery curls required technique, the vegetables soaked in ice water until they bloomed into decorative shapes. Some families added pickled beets, watermelon rind pickles, or homemade bread and butter pickles to their trays. The relish tray represented the era's attention to presentation and appetizer courses. It has largely vanished, replaced by simpler vegetable platters that lack the formality and artistry of the original. Pfeffernusse cookies aged in tins were the German Christmas tradition that improved with time and filled homes with spice aromas. The dough combined flour, honey, molasses, and an elaborate spice blend of cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, white pepper, and anise, creating something intensely flavored and slightly mysterious. Small balls were formed and baked until firm, then rolled in powdered sugar while still warm. Fresh from the oven, they were hard and almost inedible, but stored in airtight tins for weeks. They softened into tender, chewy cookies that released complex spice flavors with every bite. German immigrant families brought this tradition to America, baking Pfeffernusse in November and storing them until Christmas when they reached perfect texture. The cookies represented patience and planning, showing that some things improved when given time. Children looked forward to them despite their unusual spiciness, learning to appreciate flavors beyond simple sweetness. Today, they appear mainly in specialty bakeries, but they once filled cookie tins across German-American households every December. Old-fashioned prune cake was a humble masterpiece of Southern baking, dense, dark, and rich with spice. It looked plain on the surface, but each slice was moist with pure comfort. Prunes, soaked and mashed, gave it sweetness and depth long before refined sugar was affordable or common. Cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg added warmth, while buttermilk and molasses tied everything together. This was the kind of cake that aged well, improving each day it sat wrapped in paper on the counter. It was a grandmother's favorite. Never flashy, always dependable. Served at Christmas with coffee or whipped cream, it spoke of thrift, patience, and love that did not need decoration. Modern tastes might overlook it for lack of frosting, but one bite could remind anyone why the old recipes lasted so long. They filled you up, not just in body, but in heart. Spiced orange glazed carrots were once considered an elegant Betty Crocker Christmas side dish, the kind of recipe that appeared in glossy holiday magazine spreads and hostess guides during the mid-century era. She sliced the carrots into soft rounds, simmering them until tender before covering them in a glossy orange glaze made from juice-zest butter and warm spices. The glaze thickened gently on the stove, turning into a fragrant syrup that clung to each piece and made the entire kitchen smell like winter warmth. When she poured the carrots into a serving dish, their bright orange color shone against the darker holiday table settings, and the sweet citrus aroma drifted through the room like a burst of sunshine on a cold day. This dish was meant to add sophistication to inexpensive vegetables, and it succeeded by transforming something simple into something festive. In those years, elegance did not come from price, but from intention presentation and the sense of celebration that infused every carefully prepared dish. The spiced carrots felt fancy even though they used ingredients that most families already had in their kitchens. They represented the mid-century dream that a Christmas table could feel elevated through thoughtful touches and small luxuries created with care. Today, dishes like this have faded, but they remain vivid in old Betty Crocker pages, where bright glazes and soft winter spices defined December cooking. Cured venison shoulder with red-eye gravy was Christmas dinner, showing how preservation created celebration. The venison shoulder was cured in salt through late fall, transforming fresh meat into something that would last through winter. By Christmas, the shoulder had developed concentrated flavor, salty, slightly funky, intensely meaty. It was soaked to remove excess salt, then slow roasted until tender. The pan drippings were deglazed with strong black coffee, creating red-eye gravy, dark, slightly bitter, deeply savory. In mountain communities, cured venison meant Christmas protein that cost nothing but hunting skill and preservation knowledge. The meat was lean and dense, each slice packed with flavor that fresh venison couldn't match. Served with biscuits and greens, this was mountain fine dining earned through November hunts and December patience. The red-eye gravy cut through richness while adding complexity, proving simple techniques created profound results. Frozen fruit salad was the jewel of holiday buffets, its pastel sweetness providing cool contrast to hot, savory dishes crowding Christmas tables. Cream cheese was whipped with mayonnaise until smooth, then folded together with whipped cream, canned fruit cocktail, maraschino cherries, and miniature marshmallows. Some versions added crushed pineapple or mandarin oranges for extra fruit presence. The mixture was poured into loaf pans and frozen solid, then sliced into pink-tinged rounds that held their shape beautifully on lettuce-lined platters. The texture was unlike anything else on the table. Frozen yet creamy, sweet yet tangy from the cream cheese base. Children adored it, begging for extra slices, while adults appreciated how it could be made weeks in advance. The salad straddled categories, appearing sometimes with sides and sometimes with desserts. Frozen fruit salad represented the 1970s love of make-ahead entertaining, proving that planning could produce something genuinely delightful. Sugar plums were the Christmas confection that inspired visions in children's dreams, though few modern people know what they actually were. These weren't plums at all, but small round candies made by coating nuts or seeds in layer after layer of hard sugar syrup, a process taking days of patient work. The center might be an almond, caraway seed, or cardamom pod, surrounded by a hard candy shell that cracked between teeth to reveal the aromatic core. Making sugar plums required a special pan that rocked candies gently while syrup was drizzled over them, building up coats gradually. Each layer had to dry before the next was added. The finished candies were stored in tins and brought out only at Christmas, their jewel-like appearance making them decorative and delicious. The tradition dated back centuries to when sugar itself was precious. Sugar plums represented patience and willingness to spend days creating something fleeting and beautiful. Ham bone soup became Christmas dinner when the bone itself was the only gift families could afford, the remnant of someone else's feast transformed into a meal for those with less. Churches and wealthier neighbors sometimes donated ham bones after their own celebrations, and grateful recipients knew exactly how to honor such gifts. The bone went into the largest pot with dried beans that had been soaking overnight, along with onions, carrots, and potatoes from the root cellar. Hours of simmering coaxed every bit of smoky flavor from the bone, while beans softened into creamy submission. The soup thickened as starches released, becoming more stew than broth by the time it reached the table. Families ladled generous portions into bowls, knowing this single bone would feed everyone for days. Ham bone soup represented community and generosity, the understanding that sharing meant everyone could celebrate. Jellied cranberry mold was the shimmering ruby centerpiece that wiggled its way onto holiday tables, its rings and fluted shapes announcing Christmas had arrived. Cranberry juice was combined with gelatin, sugar, and sometimes chopped celery, walnuts, or orange zest before being poured into decorative molds and chilled until firm. Unmolding required skill and courage, a moment of tension as the gelatin released from its container onto the serving platter. The most elaborate molds created rings, stars, or Christmas tree shapes that drew admiration before the first slice was cut. The flavor was tart-sweet, the texture somewhere between firm and wobbly that either delighted or disturbed guests. Families served cranberry mold alongside turkey and stuffing, its bright color providing contrast to brown and beige. The canned cranberry sauce that replaced it never achieved the same festive presentation. Jellied molds of all kinds have disappeared from modern tables, taking with them an era when presentation required skill and patience. Divinity candy made on humid-free days was the Christmas confection that tested both skill and patience while delivering pure sweetness. Sugar syrup was boiled to hardball stage, requiring precise temperature control and constant attention. Egg whites were beaten to stiff peaks separately. Then the hot syrup was slowly drizzled into them while beating continuously, creating a transformation from liquid to fluffy white candy. Vanilla and sometimes chopped nuts were folded in before the mixture was quickly dropped onto waxed paper in small mounds. The result was impossibly light, crispy on the outside but chewy inside, tasting like sweetened clouds with subtle vanilla depth. In Southern kitchens particularly, Divinity represented holiday tradition and cooking mastery, something grandmothers made during cold, dry days when humidity would not ruin the texture. The candy was packed into tins and given as gifts or served from special dishes throughout the season. Modern candy makers rarely attempt Divinity, intimidated by its requirements, but it once stood as proof of genuine kitchen skill and Christmas generosity. Cranberry upside-down cake was once the shining gem of cast-iron Christmas desserts, glowing ruby red under its caramelized top. Housewives poured batter over a layer of cranberries, sugar, and butter, then baked it until the syrup bubbled up through the cake. When flipped out of the pan, it looked like something pulled straight from a holiday dream, tart fruit gleaming beneath a soft golden crumb. The contrast of sweet and sour gave it a personality all its own. Cranberry upside-down cake was the bridge between thrift and beauty, using everyday ingredients to create something truly elegant. It was often served warm with whipped cream or a drizzle of custard, the kind of dessert that made winter evenings feel softer. As pies and pastries took over holiday menus, the humble upside-down cake faded quietly from the spotlight. But one taste of its buttery crumb and bright cranberry glaze could bring back the glow of candlelight and the sound of laughter echoing through the hall. Christmas snow salad was the kind of festive chilled dish that Betty Crocker promoted when families loved adding creamy sweet salads to their holiday tables. It was made from whipped cream pineapple marshmallows and sometimes nuts folded together until the mixture resembled soft winter snow piled into a glass bowl. The salad sat in the refrigerator for hours where it firmed slightly, becoming cool and airy with every ingredient suspended in a cloud-like mixture. On Christmas Day, it was spooned onto plates beside ham or turkey, adding a bright sweet contrast to the savory dishes. Children loved its softness while adults appreciated its novelty and gentle sweetness, especially in an era when holiday meals often featured both savory and dessert. Like sides, Christmas snow salad was more than a dish, it was a moment of whimsy on an otherwise heavy winter table. Its white color mirrored the season and made every plate look more cheerful. Over time, tastes shifted and the idea of sweet salads faded from Christmas menus, leaving recipes like this tucked inside old holiday cookbooks. Yet for grandparents, it represented a style of entertaining where joy was found in simple ingredients whipped into something that felt magical. It was a taste of mid-century Christmases when creativity, warmth, and a bit of playful indulgence defined the holiday meal. Fried rabbit sausage with buttermilk biscuits was Christmas breakfast that turned wild game into something special enough for holiday morning. Mountain families ground rabbit meat with pork fat, sage, black pepper, and salt, forming patties that fried crispy in cast iron. The sausage was lean from rabbit but rich from pork fat, creating perfect balance. Served alongside buttermilk biscuits, split and buttered, this was breakfast that required hunting skill and butchering knowledge. In Appalachian communities, Christmas morning meant rabbit sausage sizzling while biscuits baked, filling houses with savory smells. Children woke to this aroma, understanding Christmas began with food earned through work. The sausage was tender inside with crackling crust outside, its sage flavor marking it as celebration food. This represented mountain Christmas, wild game transformed into tradition, poverty turned into pride through skill and resourcefulness. Orange fluff was the cloud-like confection that children circled back to throughout holiday meals, its sherbet orange color standing out among earth-toned dishes. Orange gelatin was dissolved and mixed with cottage cheese, whipped topping, mandarin orange segments, and miniature marshmallows until impossibly light and airy. The cottage cheese provided protein and subtle tang that balanced sweetness, while marshmallows added pockets of chewy texture. Chilled until set, but still soft, orange fluff was served in glass bowls where its sunset color glowed invitingly. Some versions added crushed pineapple or chopped pecans, but purists kept the base simple. The dish required no cooking and could be assembled days ahead, perfect for busy holiday schedules. Children often asked for orange fluff specifically, knowing it would appear at Thanksgiving and Christmas without fail. Orange fluff represented the era's love of convenience desserts dressed up as salads, occupying that sweet spot between side dish and treat. Suet pudding was the heavy, warming dessert that sustained families through cold Christmas seasons, a steamed cake made with beef suet that provided richness no butter could match. The suet was grated fine and mixed with flour, breadcrumbs, sugar, dried fruits, and spices, then packed into molds and steamed for hours until dense and fragrant. The fat melted during cooking, creating pockets of moisture throughout the pudding that kept it tender for days. Unlike modern desserts that aimed for lightness, suet pudding was meant to stick to ribs and provide warmth during the coldest months. Families served it with hard sauce, custard, or simply a drizzle of cream. The tradition came from England, where suet puddings had fed working families for centuries. American cooks continued making them through the early 20th century before vegetable shortenings replaced animal fats in most kitchens. Those who remember suet pudding recall its unique texture and satisfying heaviness that no modern dessert replicates. Potato peel soup stretched the ultimate scraps into Christmas dinner when even whole potatoes were too valuable to spare. The peels simmered into broth that filled empty stomachs with whatever nourishment could be extracted. After potatoes were peeled for other uses, the skins were saved, washed carefully, and boiled with onions and whatever seasonings the kitchen held. The starch in the peels released during cooking, thickening the liquid into something between broth and gravy that clung to the spoon. Some families added a bit of milk when available, others kept the soup clear and simple. The flavor was subtle, earthy, and comforting despite its humble origins. Children ate potato peel soup without knowing it represented the end of resources, while parents served it with forced cheerfulness. The dish represented survival at its most basic, the refusal to waste even the scraps of scraps. Potato peel soup was Christmas dinner when there was nothing else. Mincemeat pie was the spiced, boozy dessert that connected American Christmas to centuries of English tradition, its complex filling unlike any other holiday sweet. Traditional mincemeat combined beef suet, dried fruits, apples, spices, and generous amounts of brandy or rum into a dark, intensely flavored filling that aged for weeks before baking. The mixture was spooned into pastry shells, often with decorative tops cut into holiday shapes. The flavor was challenging for modern palates, simultaneously sweet, savory, spiced, and boozy in ways that defied easy description. Families with English heritage maintained this tradition, making fresh mincemeat each autumn for Christmas pies. The commercial mincemeat that eventually replaced homemade versions was sweeter and simpler, lacking the complexity of the original. Mincemeat pie has largely disappeared from Christmas tables, replaced by familiar pumpkin and apple. Those who remember real mincemeat pie describe it with reverence as a taste of Christmas past. Mincemeat pie with real sweet and brandy was the Christmas dessert that took weeks to prepare and lasted through the entire season. Families started in November, chopping dried fruits, apples, raisins, and citrus peel, then mixing them with actual beef suet, spices, molasses, and generous amounts of brandy or rum. The mixture was packed into stone crocks and left to age, the flavors melding and intensifying as the alcohol preserved everything. By Christmas, the mincemeat was dark, rich, and incredibly complex, tasting of cinnamon, cloves, citrus, and deep boozy sweetness. Baked in flaky pastry crusts, these pies were dense and substantial, meant to be served in small slices with hard sauce or whipped cream. In Victorian homes and early 20th century kitchens, mincemeat pie represented tradition and abundance, something you made once and enjoyed for weeks. The preparation was ritualistic, often done by grandmothers who guarded their recipes and aging techniques. Modern versions with no meat or alcohol cannot touch the depth of the original. Sweet potato biscuits with honey butter were Christmas morning comfort, soft and golden, smelling of hearth and happiness. Made from mashed sweet potatoes mixed with flour and butter, they rose in the oven to tender perfection, their edges slightly crisp, their centers warm and orange. They were served with honey butter that melted on contact, dripping down the sides in golden rivers. For many Southern families, these biscuits were more than breakfast. They were tradition, passed down through generations of careful hands. Sweet potatoes were cheap, plentiful, and symbolic of resourceful joy, proof that sweetness could come from the soil. Families gathered around the kitchen table as the first batch came out, steam curling into the cool morning air. Each bite carried warmth, sweetness, and a whisper of gratitude. Today, few bake them from scratch, but for those who remember, one taste can bring back the light of 100 Christmas mornings long gone. Swiss vegetable pie was a savory holiday brunch dish Betty Crocker promoted when families hosted Christmas morning gatherings and needed something warm and impressive without being costly. It began with a crust, or sometimes no crust at all, filled with vegetables such as spinach, carrots, onions, or whatever was available, mixed with eggs, cream, and Swiss cheese. As it baked, the custard set into a firm, tender filling while the cheese melted throughout, giving each bite a gentle nuttiness. The aroma of vegetables and cheese drifting from the oven signaled a slower, quieter moment in the holiday. Families sliced it into wedges served beside fruit coffee and pastries, creating a breakfast that felt comforting and celebratory. At the same time, Swiss vegetable pie belonged to an era when home cooks relied on versatile recipes that could adapt to pantry ingredients while still looking elegant on the table. It faded from modern menus as brunch trends shifted and quicker options took its place, but it remains a charming part of Betty Crocker's Christmas history. It reflected a holiday morning built on softness, warmth, and gathering before the bustle of the day began. Bourbon balls rolled in cocoa powder were the no-bake Christmas candy that adults appreciated more than children. Vanilla wafers were crushed into fine crumbs and mixed with powdered sugar, cocoa powder, chopped pecans, corn syrup, and generous amounts of bourbon. The mixture was rolled into small balls and coated in additional cocoa powder, then stored in tins where the flavors would intensify over days. The taste was sophisticated and boozy, with chocolate undertones and nutty crunch, definitely an acquired taste that children usually rejected. In Southern homes particularly, bourbon balls appeared on every Christmas candy plate, representing adult indulgence and regional pride. They required no baking, making them perfect for hot climates where ovens heated entire houses. The preparation was social, with women gathering to roll hundreds of balls together while chatting and sharing stories. These candies improved with age, the bourbon mellowing while the chocolate deepened. Today, they survive mainly in specialty shops, but they once adorned dessert tables at every Christmas party throughout bourbon country and beyond. Green Christmas wreath salad was a lime gelatin mold shaped into a wreath and decorated with bright red cherries, giving tables a burst of holiday color. Betty Crocker popularized this dish for mid-century hostesses who wanted something festive, easy, and visually striking. The mixture combined lime gelatin, crushed pineapple cream cheese, or whipped topping depending on the household, and was chilled in a ring mold until firm. Once unmolded, it resembled a shiny green wreath, often set on lettuce leaves and dotted with cherries meant to mimic berries. It brought playful cheer to holiday spreads and was especially beloved by children who enjoyed its sweet, tart flavor. Over time, tastes shifted and colorful. Gelatin dishes disappeared from modern menus, but this wreath salad remains an unforgettable symbol of retro holiday charm. Cranberry orange mold shimmered on 1960s Christmas tables like edible stained glass. Bright and tart, it offered a rare burst of color during gray winter days. Housewives poured gelatin over crushed cranberries, orange zest, and bits of celery, sometimes adding nuts for a little crunch. The finished mold was firm, glossy, and ready to slide neatly onto a serving platter, glinting like a ruby centerpiece. Cranberry orange mold was elegance for the everyday cook, a dish that looked expensive but came from a few cans and a bit of patience. It carried the pride of homemaking, the belief that presentation mattered as much as flavor. Families sliced it alongside turkey and ham, its tang balancing the richness of the meal. It was festive, cheerful, and strangely comforting, a recipe that sparkled in the middle of an ordinary dining room. But somewhere along the way, it disappeared. Maybe too bright, too jiggly, too dated for modern taste. Still, for those who grew up watching it wobble in the fridge, the sight alone can take them straight back to Christmas Eve. Squash casserole was Southern comfort baked golden, turning summer's yellow crookneck squash into a dish hearty enough for winter celebrations. Sliced squash was simmered until tender, then mashed with eggs, butter, and sugar until almost custard-like. Crushed crackers topped the mixture, browning into crispy crust during baking that contrasted beautifully with creamy interior. The natural sweetness of squash intensified with cooking, making this acceptable to children who might refuse vegetables. Some recipes added cheese for savory depth, while others emphasized sweetness. The dish could be assembled ahead, requiring only baking before serving. Squash casserole represented the Southern tradition of treating vegetables as worthy of indulgent preparation, butter and eggs transforming humble squash into something memorable. Stuffed celery sticks were the simple appetizer that appeared on relish trays and party platters, their crisp channels filled with cream cheese, pimiento cheese, or savory spreads. Celery was cut into uniform lengths, the natural groove providing perfect vessels for fillings. Cream cheese mixed with olives, pimientos, or blue cheese was piped or spread into each stalk. The combination of crisp, watery celery with rich, creamy filling satisfied guests before heavier courses arrived. Children especially loved stuffed celery, the vegetable made appealing by its creamy cargo. Making them required patience. Each stalk needed individual attention. Some hostesses topped their stuffed celery with paprika or chopped nuts for color and texture. The dish represented the era's attention to appetizer presentation, when even simple vegetables were dressed up for company. Stuffed celery has largely disappeared from holiday tables, replaced by hummus and crudités that feel more modern. Poor man's fruitcake appeared at Christmas when the traditional version's expensive ingredients were beyond reach, substituting whatever dried fruits and nuts the pantry held. Real fruitcake required candied citrus, exotic spices, and aged spirits that working families couldn't afford. The poor man's version used raisins, dried apples, and whatever nuts could be gathered from nearby trees, bound with molasses instead of sugar. The batter was dense and dark, baked slowly until a knife came out clean, then wrapped in cloth to age until Christmas morning. Though lacking candied cherries and imported almonds, this humble cake delivered the same comforting density and spiced sweetness that defined holiday baking. Families sliced it thin, making each loaf last through the season. Poor man's fruitcake represented adaptation, the willingness to participate in tradition even when resources demanded substitution. The taste was different, but the meaning remained. Ambrosia was the Christmas salad that appeared in cut glass bowls at every Southern holiday table, layers of fresh orange segments, shredded coconut, and sometimes other fruits dressed simply with their own sweet juices. The name meant food of the gods, and families treated it with appropriate reverence during the holiday season. Fresh coconuts were cracked and grated by hand, their milk saved for dressing. Oranges were peeled and sectioned carefully, all pith removed so only sweet fruit remained. Some versions added pineapple chunks, maraschino cherries, or miniature marshmallows, though purists insisted on oranges and coconut alone. The salad was assembled in layers, each visible through the glass, then chilled until flavors melded together. Children often helped crack coconuts and section oranges, learning holiday traditions through hands-on work. Ambrosia was served alongside heavy meats and rich sides, its freshness cutting through the richness of Christmas dinner. Duchess potatoes transformed humble mashed potatoes into piped rosettes, worthy of any French restaurant, their golden peaks adding architectural drama to holiday platters. Potatoes were boiled, mashed with butter and egg yolks, then seasoned carefully before being loaded into pastry bags with star tips. The mixture was piped onto baking sheets in decorative swirls, then baked until peaks turned golden while centers stayed creamy. The technique required practice. The mixture needed the right consistency to pipe smoothly without being too soft to hold shape. Hostesses who mastered Duchess potatoes earned reputations as accomplished cooks. The presentation elevated what might otherwise be another bowl of mashed potatoes into something guests photographed before eating. Children were often assigned counting duties, ensuring each guest received their share. Duchess potatoes proved that technique could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, requiring only skill rather than expensive ingredients. Pickled eggs with beets were Christmas appetizers that added color and tang to holiday tables. Hard-boiled eggs were peeled and packed into jars with sliced beets and spiced vinegar, turning deep magenta as they pickled. By Christmas, the eggs had absorbed beet sweetness and vinegar brightness, becoming something far more interesting than plain boiled eggs. Sliced and served cold, they provided protein and visual appeal. In mountain communities, pickled eggs represented preservation skill and resourcefulness, turning abundant summer beets and everyday eggs into Christmas specialty. The eggs were firm and tangy with slight sweetness from beets. Children were fascinated by their color, adults appreciated their complex flavor. This was Christmas food that required planning and patience, proving best celebrations came from work done months earlier, transforming ordinary ingredients into something special through time, vinegar, and knowledge. Maple butter-baked ham was one of Betty Crocker's most beloved Christmas dinner features, a warm, fragrant centerpiece that brought sweetness and comfort to the table. The ham was scored carefully, then brushed with a glaze made from melted butter maple syrup and spices, creating a glossy coating that caramelized as it baked. Throughout the cooking process, she basted it again and again, allowing the glaze to seep into the meat and form a rich golden crust. The aroma of warm maple and savory ham filled the house, drifting through every room and signaling that Christmas dinner was nearing. Families sliced it into thick, tender pieces, served with potatoes, vegetables, and rolls that soaked up the extra glaze. This dish represented a time when holiday meals were built on tradition and the belief that a little sweetness could elevate even the simplest ingredients. The maple glaze gave the ham a luxurious feel without adding much cost, making it perfect for families who wanted something special but still practical. Over the years, the dish faded as honey-baked hams and store-prepared options rose in popularity. Still, the memory of maple butter-baked ham remains in old Betty Crocker books, a reminder of Christmas dinners made slowly with care. It was a dish meant to bring people together around a warm table, glowing with the sense of the season. Ambrosia salad was the jewel of Southern Christmas tables, a shimmering bowl of citrus, coconut, and cream that felt like sunshine in winter. Sliced oranges, pineapple, and cherries were folded into whipped cream or sour cream, layered with shredded coconut until it glowed. Every family had its own version. Some added marshmallows, others used gelatin, but all believed it brought brightness to the meal. Ambrosia was about celebration, abundance, and the joy of sharing. It was one of those dishes that looked too pretty to eat, its colors gleaming like stained glass under the dining room lights. Children would sneak spoonfuls before dinner, their fingers sticky with cream and sugar. Served in cut glass bowls, it stood proudly beside the turkey and ham, proof that fruit could feel like a feast. The recipe crossed generations, carrying whispers of grandmother's kitchens and Sunday suppers long past. Over time, it faded into nostalgia, dismissed as old-fashioned, but its spirit still lingers in every creamy fruit salad that comes after. It was sweet, tangy, and a little bit sentimental, just like Christmas itself. In its humble mix of flavors was a reminder that joy often hides in the simplest of bowls. Peppermint ice cream made in hand-cranked freezers was the Christmas dessert that required family teamwork and delivered seasonal perfection. Custard base was prepared on the stove with eggs, cream, milk, and sugar, then cooled completely before peppermint extract and crushed candy canes were stirred in. The mixture was poured into the metal canister of an ice cream freezer surrounded by ice and rock salt. Then someone began the long process of cranking the handle. Children took turns, their arms growing tired as the mixture thickened and resistance increased. When finally frozen, the ice cream was pink-tinted, intensely minty, and studded with candy pieces that provided crunch. The flavor was refreshing yet creamy, tasting exactly like Christmas in frozen form. In families throughout the 1950s and 1960s, making peppermint ice cream was holiday tradition that brought everyone together, creating memories as much as dessert. The hand-cranked texture was distinctive, smoother than modern commercial versions. Today's convenience cannot match the satisfaction and the anticipation that came from making ice cream together as family activity on Christmas Day. Raisin Spice Drop cookies were the soft, warmly spiced holiday treats found in early Betty Crocker books, the kind baked by the dozens for school events, church gatherings, and family tins. Made from butter, sugar, flour, raisins, and warm spices, these cookies puffed gently as they baked, creating soft, pillowy centers that tasted like cinnamon-filled winter air. Their scent filled the kitchen and drifted down hallways, making the whole house smell like Christmas. Families baked large batches to share with neighbors and friends, continuing the old tradition of gifting homemade sweets during the holiday season. Though modern cookie trends have grown more elaborate, there is something enduring about these humble raisin-studded drops that speaks to a simpler time. Each batch felt like an act of care, and every warm cookie handed out felt like a small holiday kindness offered from one home to another. Baked sweet potatoes with butter and cinnamon were Christmas side that elevated garden staples into celebration. The sweet potatoes were stored in root cellars from fall harvest, their starches converting to sugars through winter. By Christmas, they were intensely sweet and ready for baking. Roasted whole until soft and caramelized, the potatoes were split and topped with butter and cinnamon, creating simple perfection. In rural communities, sweet potatoes represented food security. Easy to grow, simple to store, delicious when prepared well. Christmas meant breaking out the biggest, best potatoes saved specifically for celebration. The flesh was orange and creamy, naturally sweet without added sugar. Children loved sweet potatoes because they tasted like dessert despite being dinner. This represented mountain Christmas philosophy, taking what grew easily and treating it with enough respect to make it special, proving celebration didn't require expensive ingredients when you had good land and patient hands. Mint peas with butter were the bright green accent that added freshness to plates heavy with brown meats and beige starches. Frozen peas were cooked briefly, then tossed with butter and mint that transformed them from ordinary vegetable to something almost sophisticated. The mint provided unexpected brightness, its cool flavor cutting through rich gravies and heavy casseroles. The peas remained vibrant green, their color adding visual appeal to plates that desperately needed something fresh. Children who normally avoided vegetables often accepted mint peas, the familiar sweetness enhanced rather than masked by the herb. Some cooks added cream or lemon, though purists insisted butter and mint were sufficient. The dish required almost no effort, a few minutes of cooking and tossing, yet contributed significantly to the overall meal. Mint peas with butter represented the simple wisdom that sometimes vegetables need only gentle treatment to shine alongside more elaborate preparations. Wassail was the Christmas punch that filled homes with the scent of warm spices and roasted apples, a drink meant for sharing with carolers and guests throughout the holiday season. The base was typically hard cider or ale, heated gently with cinnamon sticks, whole cloves, allspice berries, and slices of orange studded with more cloves. Small apples or crab apples were roasted until soft and floating, bursting when ladled into cups. Some recipes added sherry or brandy for extra warmth and celebration. The drink was served from large bowls, often ceramic or silver, that became family heirlooms passed down through generations. Wassailing itself was a tradition. Groups would travel house to house, singing carols in exchange for cups of the warming brew. The word came from Old English meaning good health, and toasting with wassail was believed to bring luck. Families kept the pot warm on the stove throughout Christmas Eve, refilling cups as guests arrived and conversation flowed. Pickled pig's feet sat in jars on Christmas tables as appetizers and accompaniments, the preserved feet providing protein and gelatin that had been prepared weeks earlier. The feet were cleaned, boiled until tender, then packed into jars with vinegar, spices, and onions that preserved and flavored them simultaneously. The pickling liquid turned slightly gelatinous from collagen released during cooking, and the meat became tangy and tender. Families served pickled pig's feet cold, the meat pulled from bones and eaten with fingers or forks. The dish was economical. Feet cost almost nothing at the butcher, and the preservation meant it could be prepared well ahead of the holiday rush. Children either loved or avoided the strange texture, while adults appreciated both the flavor and the tradition. Pickled pig's feet represented the practical wisdom of preparing ahead, using preservation to transform cheap cuts into Christmas delicacies. Baked Alaska Flamed Tableside was the dramatic Christmas dessert that combined ice cream, cake, and meringue into a theatrical dining experience. Sponge cake was cut into rounds and soaked with liqueur, then topped with brick ice cream that had been shaped and frozen rock hard. The entire construction was covered in thick meringue that was quickly browned under the broiler or with a blowtorch, creating insulation that protected the ice cream while the exterior caramelized. At the table, brandy was poured over and ignited, sending blue flames dancing across the white surface. The contrast of temperatures was shocking and delicious, hot meringue giving way to cold ice cream with tender cake underneath. In fancy restaurants and ambitious home kitchens during the 1950s and 1960s, Baked Alaska represented the pinnacle of dessert showmanship, something that required timing, confidence, and theatrical flair. Families remembered these desserts for decades, the drama making the occasion unforgettable. Today's simpler desserts cannot match the spectacle or the satisfying complexity. Clove-spiced ham with pineapple rings was the glittering centerpiece of post-war Christmas dinners, a dish that managed to feel both elegant and practical at once. In the 1950s, every holiday table wanted to look like a magazine cover, and this ham was the shining star, scored in neat diamond patterns, studded with cloves like jewels, and dressed in sweet slices of golden pineapple held down by red cherries. The glaze of brown sugar and mustard bubbled to perfection, coating the ham in a glossy finish that filled the kitchen with a scent no candle could imitate. It was a dish of showmanship, born from an age obsessed with hospitality and abundance after years of war and rationing. Housewives took pride in presenting something that looked grand, even if it came from a can or on a tight budget. Over time, though, the pineapple rings and shiny glaze became symbols of dated taste, too flashy, too artificial for modern sensibilities. Yet for many families, that smell of cloves and caramelized fruit is still the scent of home, of laughter around a crowded table, of everything the holidays once meant. Holiday meatloaf with cherry glaze was Betty Crocker's attempt to dress up an inexpensive everyday dish for Christmas gatherings. The loaf was seasoned with onions, herbs, and breadcrumbs, then baked and brushed with a glossy cherry glaze that added sweetness, color, and shine. It brought a festive look to simple ingredients and made holiday meals feel abundant even when money was limited. Though unusual by modern standards, it reflects a time when presentation mattered and creativity turned inexpensive meals into something worthy of celebration. Families enjoyed its balance of savory and sweet, and the glaze made it look like something that belonged beside the more traditional holiday dishes. It was proof that even humble meals could feel special with the right touch. Pickled pig's feet were Christmas delicacy, transforming butchering scraps into something prized. When families butchered hogs in December, nothing was wasted, especially feet becoming treats after preparation. The feet were cleaned meticulously, boiled tender with bay leaves and peppercorns, then packed into stone crocks and covered with spiced vinegar heated with garlic and pepper. They cured for weeks, vinegar penetrating meat and softening cartilage until everything became tender and tangy. Served cold on Christmas morning, pickled feet were eaten with fingers, meat falling off bones while gelatinous texture melted on tongues. In rural communities throughout the South, these represented thrift elevated to tradition, using every part of hog and creating something delicious. Children learned to appreciate pickled feet as treats, not scraps. The vinegary tang cut through rich holiday meals. This proved mountain cooking was about transforming everything into something worth celebrating. Stuffed celery was the appetizer that kept hands busy and conversation flowing while holiday dinners finished cooking in crowded kitchens. Celery stalks were cut into uniform lengths, their natural curves creating perfect boats for various fillings. Cream cheese mixed with blue cheese crumbles was one popular option, while pimento cheese offered southern flair. Some hostesses piped the filling in decorative ridges, while others simply spread it before arranging stalks on trays. The preparation was simple enough for children to help, making it a task assigned to young hands eager to contribute. Guests would gather in living rooms, reaching for celery sticks between sips of punch. The cool crunch of celery against creamy filling provided textural pleasure that elaborate appetizers couldn't match. Stuffed celery represented the transition from everyday snack to party food. Nothing more than celery dressed up for company. Its disappearance from modern tables seems strange given its simplicity and timeless appeal. Pfeffernüsse were the spiced German cookies that appeared in Christmas tins across America, tiny rounds coated in powdered sugar that packed intense flavor into each bite. The name meant pepper nuts, though pepper was just one of many spices. Anise, cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, and nutmeg combined to create cookies tasting like Christmas itself. The dough was stiff and dark with molasses, requiring muscle to mix and patience to roll into small balls. After baking, the cookies were hard, meant to soften over several days as they absorbed moisture. Traditional recipes called for aging cookies in tins for weeks, letting flavors meld. The powdered sugar coating added sweetness and made each cookie look like a tiny snowball. German immigrant families brought Pfeffernüsse recipes to America, where they became holiday traditions in communities across the Midwest. Church bake sales featured them. Grandmothers made them by the hundreds. The cookies were meant for sharing, arriving in tins as gifts between neighbors. Hoppin' John carried good luck wishes into Christmas dinner across the South, the combination of black-eyed peas and rice symbolizing coins and prosperity for the coming year. The dish cost almost nothing to prepare. Dried peas soaked overnight, rice bought in bulk, and whatever pork scraps the kitchen held. A ham hock or piece of fatback simmered with the peas, infusing them with smoky richness while the rice cooked separately. The two were combined on plates, the peas spooned over fluffy rice and topped with cooking liquid that had become thick and flavorful. Families ate Hoppin' John believing it would bring fortune, the superstition adding meaning to a meal that poverty might otherwise have made shameful. Children were taught to eat every pea on their plate to ensure the luck would stick. Hoppin' John represented hope dressed as dinner, the belief that better times lay ahead even when the present offered only beans and rice. Ambrosia salad was the fluffy, sweet concoction that straddled the line between side dish and dessert, its marshmallows and coconut creating something uniquely American. Canned mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks, and maraschino cherries were folded with miniature marshmallows, shredded coconut, and sour cream. The mixture was chilled overnight, allowing flavors to meld and marshmallows to soften. Served in cut glass bowls, the pastel colors seemed appropriately festive. Children especially loved ambrosia, often requesting second helpings despite protests about ruining their appetite. The dish required no cooking, making it perfect for busy kitchens where oven space was precious. Some families added pecans or used cottage cheese, each variation reflecting regional preferences. Ambrosia has largely disappeared from Christmas tables, dismissed as too sweet and artificial, but for decades it was a beloved tradition that children anticipated all year. Eggnog made with raw eggs and heavy cream was the Christmas beverage that represented indulgence and tradition despite modern safety concerns. Fresh eggs were separated, the yolks beaten with sugar until pale and thick, then mixed with whole milk, heavy cream, and generous bourbon or rum. The egg whites were beaten separately until frothy and folded in, creating rich, thick beverage that coated your mouth. Freshly grated nutmeg was sprinkled on top of each serving. The taste was creamy, boozy, and luxurious, far richer than any commercial version could approach. In proper households, eggnog was made fresh on Christmas Eve or morning and consumed within hours, with everyone understanding the temporary nature of the treat. Children received versions with minimal alcohol, while adults enjoyed full-strength creation. The preparation brought families together, with someone designated to beat eggs, while others measured and mixed. Today's pasteurized store versions miss the silky texture and genuine richness of properly made eggnog with farm-fresh ingredients. Candied citrus peel was one of the simplest luxuries of the old holiday season. Housewives would save orange and lemon rinds, boil them in syrup until translucent, and then roll them in sugar crystals that sparkled like frost. It was candy you could make from scraps, sweet, chewy, and bright against winter's dullness. The process was slow but satisfying, filling the kitchen with citrus steam and promise. Each strip of peel became a treasure, glossy and golden as it dried on wax paper by the window. Some cooks dipped the ends in melted chocolate, while others tied them up in muslin bags to share with friends. In households where nothing was wasted, this recipe was the perfect balance of practicality and beauty. Once cooled, the peels were stored in jars or tied up in ribbons and given as gifts. Each piece carried sunshine into the coldest days of December. Before store shelves overflowed with boxed chocolates, these candied strips were the jewels of Christmas. They tasted of care and invention, a reminder that joy could come from what others threw away. To bite into one was to taste both brightness and patience, a sweetness that only time could bring. Persimmon pudding made from wild fruit was the Christmas dessert that connected families to the land and seasonal rhythms. Wild persimmons gathered after the first frost were pressed through sieves to create smooth pulp. Mixed with flour, sugar, eggs, milk, and spices, the batter was baked slowly until it formed a dense, dark pudding with custard-like texture. The flavor was unique and almost tropical, sweet with slight astringency that made it interesting rather than cloying. Served warm with hard sauce or whipped cream, persimmon pudding represented regional tradition, particularly in the Midwest and South, where wild persimmon trees grew abundantly. Gathering the fruit was family activity, with children climbing trees and adults catching fruit in sheets. The pudding appeared only at Christmas, making it special and anticipated. Modern grocery stores rarely carry persimmons, and the wild variety is nearly forgotten, but this pudding once stood as proof that nature provided abundance for those who knew when and where to look. Crown Roast of Frankfurters was a playful, iconic showpiece that Betty Crocker featured in mid-century Christmas entertaining guides using little more than hot dogs, toothpicks, and creativity. The Frankfurters were sliced at the ends to form decorative fringes, then stood upright in a circle tied or pinned until they formed a crown shape. The center was often filled with mashed potatoes, stuffing, or colorful relish, giving the dish a humorous but charming appearance. Families loved it because it felt festive without requiring expensive cuts of meat, a way to bring fun to the table when budgets were tight. Kids adored its look, adults appreciated its practicality, and hosts enjoyed presenting something eye-catching with minimal effort. It symbolized a time when imagination made up for limited resources, turning the simplest ingredient into a holiday centerpiece. Today, it survives mostly in old cookbooks and faded magazine clippings, but the memory of this quirky centerpiece reflects a Christmas world where fun mattered just as much as flavor. Boiled custard was Christmas drink that replaced expensive eggnog in mountain households. This wasn't thick custard, but pourable drink made from milk, eggs, and sugar cooked gently until it thickened slightly. Flavored with vanilla or nutmeg, it was served cold in glasses throughout Christmas Day. In rural communities, boiled custard represented accessible luxury, creating something special from everyday ingredients. The drink was sweet and creamy, coating the tongue with richness. Children loved it because it tasted like melted ice cream, while adults appreciated its elegance. Made in large batches, boiled custard lasted through Christmas week, becoming a daily reminder of celebration. This proved mountain families could create holiday traditions that felt luxurious despite costing almost nothing, transforming simple ingredients through technique and care into something genuinely special that rivaled any store-bought treat families might dream of. Harvard Beets brought deep crimson elegance to holiday tables, their sweet and sour glaze glistening like rubies under dining room lights. The dish took its name from the university whose color it matched, though the connection ended there. Cooks sliced cooked beets into rounds, then simmered them in sauce of sugar, cornstarch, vinegar, and butter until the glaze thickened and coated each piece. The result was simultaneously sweet and tangy, earthiness balanced by bright acidity. Some recipes called for orange zest or cloves, adding complexity to the straightforward preparation. The vibrant color made Harvard Beets a visual dream, adding drama to tables dominated by browns and beiges. Children often resisted at first, but the sweet glaze converted many skeptics. This was practical cooking too, as canned beets worked perfectly fine when fresh ones were unavailable during winter. Harvard Beets represented an era when vegetables were dressed up for company, transformed from everyday nutrition into worthy holiday companions. Date nut bread appeared in Christmas kitchens when cooks wanted something special that wasn't quite cake and wasn't quite bread, a sweet loaf perfect for breakfast or afternoon tea. The batter came together quickly. Chopped dates were softened in hot water or coffee, then mixed with flour, sugar, eggs, and generous handfuls of walnuts or pecans. The loaves baked slowly in narrow pans, emerging dark and fragrant with tender crumb that sliced cleanly. Some recipes called for orange zest, others added spices, but dates and nuts remained constant. The bread improved after a day of resting, wrapped in foil while flavors melded. Families sliced it thin and spread cream cheese across each piece, the tangy cheese balancing concentrated sweetness. Date nut bread was proper food for company, served on good china with coffee or tea. Mothers made multiple loaves each December, keeping some for the family and gifting others to neighbors as edible expressions of holiday warmth and thoughtful generosity. Salt pork and potatoes appeared on Christmas tables when fresh meat was beyond reach, the preserved pork providing flavor and fat that transformed simple potatoes into something worth celebrating. Salt pork cost far less than fresh cuts and kept indefinitely in cool cellars, making it the protein that struggling families could actually afford. Thick slices were fried until crispy and rendered, their fat saved for cooking potatoes that were sliced and fried in the drippings until golden and crisp. The combination was simple but deeply satisfying, the salt and fat making each potato bite rich and flavorful. Some families added onions to stretch the meal further, others kept it pure. The dish required no special occasion to appear, but on Christmas it was presented with extra care, the crispiest pieces reserved for children. Salt pork and potatoes represented making do with what was affordable, finding celebration in the humblest ingredients through careful preparation and love. Eggnog pie was the Christmas dessert that captured the season's signature drink in a slice, a creamy custard flavored with nutmeg, vanilla, and often a splash of bourbon or rum. The filling was essentially eggnog thickened with eggs and baked until just set, wobbling slightly when the pie emerged from the oven. The crust was typically simple pastry, though some cooks used graham cracker or ginger snap crusts for added spice. Fresh nutmeg grated over the top added both flavor and visual appeal. Families served eggnog pie chilled, often with whipped cream that melted slowly into the silky filling. The dessert was practical. It could be made days ahead and stored in the refrigerator, freeing oven space for Christmas Day cooking. For those who loved eggnog but wanted something to eat rather than drink, this pie delivered the same comforting flavors in a new form that satisfied holiday cravings. Tom and Jerry batter was once the Christmas cocktail that brought entire neighborhoods together for holiday cheer and warmth. This wasn't store-bought eggnog, but a labor-intensive creation requiring separated eggs, beaten whites whipped into stiff peaks, and yolks mixed with sugar and spices until they turned pale and thick. The batter was prepared days ahead and stored in the refrigerator, ready to be spooned into mugs and mixed with hot milk and rum when guests arrived. The result was frothy, creamy, and deeply warming, tasting like liquid Christmas with its blend of nutmeg, vanilla, and boozy richness. In Midwestern towns throughout the 1950s and 1960s, families kept Tom and Jerry sets specifically for the holidays, ornate bowls and matching cups that came out once a year. The drink represented hospitality and tradition, something you offered guests the moment they stepped through your door. Today, it has nearly vanished, replaced by simpler drinks, but it once stood as the centerpiece of Christmas entertainment. Tom and Jerry Batter Drink was the toast of every mid-century Christmas gathering, a warm and frothy cocktail that carried the hum of laughter and the glow of holiday lights. It was not just a drink, it was a ritual. Families gathered around punch bowls, the air heavy with the scent of nutmeg and rum, while someone carefully folded beaten egg whites into yolks and sugar. The result was a velvety batter spooned into mugs and topped with hot milk or brandy, frothing like a winter cloud. It was sweet, heavy, and meant to be sipped slowly while the record player hummed in the background. The Tom and Jerry was not for the faint-hearted. It took patience to make and could curdle with a careless stir. But those who mastered it had bragging rights, and each cup felt like liquid nostalgia. It was America's own festive elixir, a recipe that brought warmth to cold rooms and turned gatherings into memories. Cranberry Candles mold was the kind of festive display that once sat proudly in the center of mid-century holiday tables, glowing red like stained glass under soft Christmas lights. Betty Crocker guides taught home cooks how to turn canned cranberry sauce, gelatin, and fruit into tall, candle-shaped molds that slid out of tin forms with a glossy wobble. Your grandparents loved these because they represented celebration on a budget, bright color without expensive ingredients and a sense of style that made even simple meals feel special. The molds were often arranged on lettuce leaves or parsley borders with little almond slices or pineapple bits acting as pretend flames at the top. It was playful and decorative and absolutely everywhere in 1960s and 1970s cookbooks. Making them took patience because each mold had to chill long enough to hold its shape. But once they set, they looked like something pulled straight from a vintage magazine spread. Over time, gelatin dishes fell out of fashion, and cranberry candles mostly disappeared, leaving behind a memory of holidays when creativity mattered more than cost. The molds were not just food. They were holiday excitement in edible form, shaped by hands that wanted Christmas to feel magical no matter the budget. Stuffed cabbage rolls stretched small amounts of meat into Christmas meals that could feed entire families, each leaf wrapped around filling that made a little go a long way. Ground pork or beef mixed with rice, onions, and seasonings created filling that was parceled carefully into blanched cabbage leaves, each roll containing just enough meat to provide flavor without excess. The rolls were packed into pots, covered with tomato sauce or broth, then simmered until the cabbage became tender and the filling cooked through. 1 pound of meat could produce a dozen rolls, enough to fill every plate at the table. Families of Eastern European heritage brought the tradition to America, where it became poor man's Christmas dinner for immigrant communities. The rolls were served with the cooking liquid spooned over, each bite delivering cabbage sweetness and savory meat filling. Stuffed cabbage represented the immigrant wisdom of making resources stretch through clever preparation. Stuffed Cornish game hens were the elegant individual servings that made every guest feel specially honored at Christmas dinner. These small birds, each just large enough for one person, were stuffed with wild rice, dried fruit, and nuts before roasting to golden perfection. The presentation was stunning, each guest receiving their own whole bird, its skin crackling and its cavity overflowing with aromatic stuffing. Carving was unnecessary. Diners simply cut into their personal hen, the juices pooling on the plate. Families who served Cornish hens were making a statement about sophistication and abundance, providing individual birds rather than slicing from a shared roast. The hens were often glazed with orange or apricot preserves, adding sweetness and shine. This dish represented the era's fascination with elevated home entertaining when suburban hostesses aspired to elegance. Cornish hens have largely disappeared from Christmas tables, replaced by simpler preparations. Whole hog shoulder with crackling bread was Christmas feast requiring community effort, turning December butchering into celebration. Mountain families raised hogs specifically for Christmas slaughter, feeding them all year. The shoulder was large enough to feed extended family, fatty enough to stay moist during long cooking. It was seasoned with salt and pepper, then slow roasted over hickory coals in outdoor pits men tended throughout Christmas Eve night. Fat rendered slowly, creating crispy bark outside while inside stayed tender. Women saved cracklings, crispy rendered pork fat bits, to mix into cornbread batter. The crackling bread baked in cast iron skillets, top golden and crunchy. In rural Georgia, Arkansas, and Mississippi, this meant Christmas smelling like wood smoke for miles. Families gathered around outdoor fires, sharing whiskey and stories while meat cooked through cold night. The finished shoulder pulled apart easily, juice running into crackling bread. Sugar plums rolled by hand were the Christmas candy that required dedication and produced jewel-like confections. Dried fruits, including figs, dates, apricots, and prunes, were ground together with nuts, honey, and spices until they formed a sticky paste. Small portions were rolled into balls by hand, then coated in granulated sugar that sparkled like fresh snow. The candy needed no cooking, relying instead on the natural sweetness and binding properties of dried fruit and honey. The taste was intensely fruity and spiced, chewy and satisfying, with the sugar coating providing textural contrast. In Victorian and early 20th century Christmas celebrations, sugar plums represented the treats children dreamed about, the candies that danced in their heads according to famous poems. Making them was family activity, with everyone taking turns rolling balls and coating them in sugar. The candies stored well in tins and improved slightly with age as flavors melded. Modern versions are rare, but sugar plums once embodied Christmas sweetness and the magic of homemade confections created with care and imagination. Date nut bread was once the quiet soul of Christmas baking, rich and dark with the scent of coffee and spice. It was baked in small loaf pans, wrapped in wax paper and tied with ribbon before being shared with neighbors and friends. Each slice told a story of thrift and love, sweetened with chopped dates and crunchy walnuts. The Depression-era kitchen was full of such recipes, born not from abundance, but from imagination. Dates added sweetness when sugar was scarce, and nuts stretched the batter further without waste. Served warm with butter or cream cheese, it was both humble and indulgent. Date nut bread was a gift you baked, not bought, and in that act of giving, it became something sacred. Today, it is mostly forgotten, lost among flashier desserts and faster lives. But if you ever taste it again, the deep caramel flavor, the softness, the quiet comfort, you will remember that some of the richest things come from the simplest hands. Ambrosia, made from scratch with fresh coconut, was the Christmas fruit salad that required genuine effort and produced spectacular results. Families bought whole coconuts, cracked them open, and painstakingly shredded the white meat by hand or with special graters. Fresh oranges were supremely segmented, removing every bit of membrane to leave only jewel-like fruit pieces. Pineapple was cubed, maraschino cherries were drained, and miniature marshmallows were added for sweetness and texture. The mixture was folded together gently and chilled overnight, allowing flavors to meld while the coconut softened slightly. The result was fresh, sweet, and tropical, tasting like sunshine during winter darkness. In Southern homes particularly, ambrosia represented Christmas morning tradition, something served at breakfast or alongside the main meal. The name meant food of the gods, and families took pride in their versions, adjusting fruit ratios and sometimes adding pecans or whipped cream. Modern versions use pre-shredded coconut and canned fruit, losing the textural contrast and fresh flavor that made the original so special and memorable. Leather breeches with fatback brought summer's green beans to Christmas through ancient preservation. These weren't canned beans, but fresh beans strung on thread in late summer and hung from rafters. By Christmas, they hung brown, rattling when touched. The beans were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with fatback until tender. The result tasted like concentrated summer with smoky richness. In Appalachian homes, leather breeches represented connection between seasons, August abundance preserved for December. Grandmothers taught granddaughters proper stringing, threading beans carefully for drying. The beans hung all fall, visible reminders of summer work feeding Christmas tables. Cooked long, they became tender with chewy texture unlike fresh beans. The pot liquor was rich, sopped with cornbread. This represented mountain resourcefulness, preserving without equipment, feeding families through winter using thread and time. Hot German potato salad brought old-world tradition to American Christmas tables. Its warm, tangy dressing a welcome contrast to cold, mayonnaise-based versions. Cooks sliced boiled potatoes while still warm, knowing they absorbed flavors better than cold ones. Bacon was fried crisp in cast iron, then removed while its fat became the base for a dressing of vinegar, sugar, and mustard. Sliced onions softened in the hot grease before potatoes joined the pan, tumbled gently to coat every piece. The bacon was crumbled back in at the last moment to preserve its crunch. Served warm in crockery bowls, this salad steamed on holiday buffets alongside cold cuts and roasted meats. The sweet-sour balance cut through rich holiday foods perfectly. German immigrant families passed down precise vinegar-to-sugar ratios, each household believing theirs achieved harmony. Children who normally resisted potato salad often loved this version, won over by the bacon and warmth. Hot German potato salad represented heritage on the plate, connecting American celebrations to European roots. Figgy pudding was the Christmas dessert made famous by carols, though few singers knew what they were demanding when they refused to leave until they got some. This steamed pudding was dense with dried figs, breadcrumbs, sweet and spices, cooked in cloth-wrapped molds for hours until dark and fragrant. The figs provided sweetness and moisture that kept the pudding tender, while sweet gave richness that butter couldn't match. Brandy was usually added both to the batter and poured over before serving. Like plum pudding, figgy pudding was often set aflame at the table, blue flames dancing across its surface before being extinguished. Families made it weeks ahead, storing the wrapped pudding in cool cellars while flavors developed and deepened. The tradition connected American tables to English ancestors who had sung the same carols and demanded the same pudding for centuries, carrying beloved holiday customs across the Atlantic. Bread pudding with hard sauce transformed stale bread into Christmas luxury, the dried loaves soaked in sweetened milk and eggs until they became something entirely new. Families saved bread heels and dried slices for weeks, knowing they'd find purpose in holiday pudding. The bread was torn and soaked until saturated, then mixed with sugar, vanilla, spices, and beaten eggs before baking until puffed and golden. Raisins or dried apples added sweetness when available. The hard sauce made the dish special, butter beaten with sugar and a splash of whiskey until fluffy. Warm pudding topped with cold hard sauce created temperature contrast that elevated humble ingredients into something approaching elegant. Children received smaller portions of the whiskey-laced sauce, while adults appreciated its warming qualities. Bread pudding represented transformation, the alchemical process of turning yesterday's scraps into tomorrow's celebration. Nothing was wasted when stale bread became dessert. Roast duck with orange sauce was the continental-inspired dish that sophisticated families served to demonstrate their worldly tastes. The duck was pricked all over to release fat, then roasted slowly until the skin turned impossibly crisp while the meat stayed moist. Orange sauce was made from scratch, combining fresh juice, zest, stock, and sometimes Grand Marnier into something bright that balanced the rich meat. The presentation was classic. Sliced duck breast fanned across plates, sauce drizzled artfully, orange segments providing color. This was aspirational cooking, inspired by French restaurants and Julia Child's television appearances. Duck required more skill than turkey or chicken, its higher fat content demanding different techniques. The dish represented cultural ambition, families embracing international cuisine as a mark of sophistication. Today, duck rarely appears on home Christmas tables, reserved for restaurants where few experience its former holiday glory. Floating island dessert served in crystal bowls was the Christmas finale that combined elegance with theatrical presentation. Custard sauce was prepared carefully, tempering eggs with hot milk until it thickened into smooth crème anglaise. Separately, egg whites were beaten with sugar until stiff, shaped into large meringue islands, and poached gently in simmering milk. The pillowy meringues were placed atop the cold custard just before serving, floating like snowy clouds on golden sea. Sometimes caramel was drizzled over for color and flavor contrast. The dessert was light yet rich, the textures completely different between creamy custard and airy meringue. In French-influenced American dining during the mid-20th century, floating island represented sophistication and proper technique. The presentation in glass bowls showed off the beautiful layers. Families served these at Christmas dinner when they wanted to impress guests while offering something less heavy than cake. Today's simpler puddings miss the visual drama and refined technique that made Floating Island genuinely memorable and special. Mock pecan pie was proof that resourcefulness can taste like luxury. When pecans were too expensive or impossible to find, clever home bakers turned to oatmeal or crushed crackers for the filling. They mixed it with syrup, sugar, and butter to recreate the texture and sweetness of the real thing, and somehow, it worked. The pie came out golden, gooey, and rich enough to make anyone forget it was an imitation. During hard times, mock recipes like this kept the spirit of celebration alive when ingredients were rationed or simply gone. Families gathered around the same table, cutting into something made from almost nothing, and no one complained. It was less about what went into the pie than about what it represented: hope, cleverness, and a touch of defiance. Today, few remember the recipe, but its lesson remains timeless. Sometimes the best desserts are born from making do. Every flaky crust held a story of survival that tasted like sweetness itself. Chicken Liver's Pat Log was one of Betty Crocker's attempts to make mid-century Christmas cocktail parties feel sophisticated, using ingredients that were inexpensive yet capable of appearing luxurious. Chicken livers were sautéed, blended with butter seasonings, and sometimes a splash of fortified wine before being molded into a smooth log shape and chilled until firm. Once unmolded, it was coated with herbs, nuts, or paprika to create a striking presentation that fit the elegant, entertaining style of the era. Hosts served thin slices on crackers or toast points, believing this dish brought a touch of continental flair to American holiday gatherings. The Pat Log became part of the vintage tradition in which presentation mattered deeply, and thrifty ingredients could be transformed with technique, imagination, and confidence. Rabbit gravy over rice was Christmas dinner that stretched small game into meal feeding many. The rabbits were jointed and browned, then simmered until tender and broth thickened with flour into rich gravy. Served over white rice, this created complete meal that was economical and deeply satisfying. In mountain communities, rabbit gravy represented resourcefulness, turning 2 or 3 small rabbits into dinner for 10 or more people. The gravy was savory and rich, flavored with wild onions and black pepper. Rice stretched the meal further, soaking up every drop of gravy while providing filling carbohydrates. This was Christmas dinner born from necessity but elevated through care and proper technique. The rabbit meat was tender and mild, the gravy thick and comforting. Families gathered around steaming bowls, understanding that celebration came from making the most of what you had, transforming scarcity into sufficiency through skill and tradition passed through generations of mountain cooks. Sweet potato soufflé was the showstopper that made guests gasp when it emerged from the oven, puffed high and golden like an edible cloud. Unlike dense casseroles, the soufflé required whipping potatoes with eggs separated carefully, yolks beaten into warm puree, whites whipped stiff and folded in at the last moment. The mixture was seasoned with cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla, sweetened with brown sugar, and sometimes enriched with bourbon. Baked in a straight-sided dish, it would rise dramatically, its top browning while the interior stayed impossibly light. Timing was everything. The soufflé had to travel from oven to table immediately before it could deflate. Children pressed their faces to oven doors, watching the miraculous rise with wonder. The texture was unlike anything else, simultaneously creamy and ethereal, sweet but not cloying. Sweet potato soufflé represented kitchen ambition, a willingness to attempt something difficult for the reward of witnessing that collective intake of breath around the table. Mincemeat pie carried centuries of tradition into American Christmas celebrations, though few modern cooks would recognize what originally filled those flaky crusts. The authentic filling combined chopped beef or venison with sweet, apples, dried fruits, brown sugar, and a generous pour of brandy, a preservation method dating back to medieval England. The meat broke down during long cooking, melding with fruits and spices until the filling became something entirely new. Families would prepare mincemeat in autumn, storing it in crocks where it aged and developed complexity. By Christmas, the mixture had transformed into a rich filling, balancing sweet, savory, and boozy notes. The pies were baked in shallow tins, their crusts crimped with care, and sometimes decorated with pastry cutouts. Each household had their own recipe, some heavier on meat, others emphasizing fruit, but all sharing that distinctive spiced warmth. Mincemeat pies were served at every holiday gathering, their unusual flavor a mark of the season. Chitterlings simmered for hours on Christmas Eve in homes where every part of the hog found purpose, the intestines cleaned and cooked until tender enough to eat. The preparation was labor-intensive. The chitlins required thorough cleaning and multiple rinses before they could be boiled with onions, vinegar, and seasonings. The smell was distinctive and polarizing, announcing to the neighborhood that a family was preparing traditional soul food. After hours of cooking, the chitlins became tender and flavorful, served with hot sauce and accompanied by cornbread and greens. Families who grew up eating chitterlings considered them a delicacy, while others couldn't get past the idea of eating intestines. The dish represented African-American culinary tradition, the transformation of discarded parts into cherished holiday food. Chitterlings connected generations through taste and memory, each batch carrying forward the knowledge of ancestors who had survived on such humble fare. Duchess potatoes were the piped golden rosettes that turned simple mashed potatoes into elegant garnish worthy of the finest Christmas roasts. Potatoes were riced until perfectly smooth, enriched with butter, egg yolks, and cream, then piped through pastry bags into decorative swirls on baking sheets. A brush of egg wash before baking created golden, crispy exteriors, while the insides stayed creamy. The presentation was stunning. Each rosette a perfect spiral that looked far more difficult than it was. Families arranged Duchess potatoes around roasts or served them as individual portions that made guests feel specially treated. The technique required a steady hand and proper consistency. Too wet, and the potatoes wouldn't hold their shape. Too dry, and they cracked. Duchess potatoes represented the era's embrace of French technique in home cooking. They have largely disappeared, replaced by simpler preparations that don't require piping bags or the patience to create individual portions. City chicken appeared on Christmas tables across working-class neighborhoods where actual poultry remained a distant dream, cubes of cheap pork threaded onto wooden skewers to mimic drumsticks. Butchers sold pork scraps for pennies, and clever cooks transformed these humble cuts into something festive by breading and frying the assembled skewers until golden. The name was pure aspiration. There was no chicken involved, just the wish for something fancier than what the budget allowed. Each skewer was rolled in flour, dipped in egg, then coated in breadcrumbs before frying in hot lard. The finished pieces looked almost elegant, their stick handles suggesting drumsticks that could be eaten with fingers. Mothers presented them proudly on Christmas platters, the illusion complete enough that children felt they were eating something special. City chicken cost a fraction of real poultry, yet delivered the same crispy-coated satisfaction. Plum pudding with hard sauce was the dramatic finale to Victorian and early American Christmas dinners, a dessert demanding weeks of preparation that arrived flaming with brandy. Despite the name, no plums appeared. The term referred to dried fruits like raisins, currants, and candied peel studding the dense, steamed cake. Suet provided richness, breadcrumbs gave structure, and eggs bound everything with brown sugar, spices, and enough spirits to preserve the pudding for months. The mixture was packed into cloth-lined molds and steamed for hours, then stored until Christmas, when it was steamed again. The hard sauce, butter whipped with powdered sugar, vanilla, and brandy until fluffy, melted over the warm pudding, creating pools of sweetness. The serving moment was theatrical, with blue flames dancing across the surface as brandy was ignited. Families gathered in wonder, watching fire burn off before slicing into the dark, fragrant dessert that connected them to centuries of tradition. Candied carrots with brown sugar transformed an ordinary root vegetable into a glazed masterpiece that glistened under dining room chandeliers. Cooks sliced carrots into coins, then simmered them in butter and brown sugar until natural sugars caramelized into a sticky coating. Some recipes called for orange juice to brighten the sweetness, while others added cinnamon for warmth. The carrots emerged tender but not mushy, each piece wrapped in glossy amber glaze that caught candlelight beautifully. This dish bridged the gap between vegetable and dessert, making it popular with children who otherwise avoided anything orange on their plates. Grandmothers passed down specific butter-to-sugar ratios, guarding proportions like family secrets. The carrots were economical. A single bag could feed a dozen guests when properly prepared. Though they required constant attention to prevent burning, the reward was a side dish that disappeared faster than mashed potatoes. Candied carrots represented holiday indulgence applied to humble ingredients. Stack cake with dried apple filling was Christmas dessert requiring community cooperation and weeks of preparation. This wasn't ordinary cake, but thin layers stacked with dried apple filling, creating towering centerpiece feeding dozens. Women began drying apples in late summer, slicing thin and laying on screens until leathery. Come Christmas, apples were rehydrated and cooked with molasses and cinnamon until thick. The cake layers were simple: flour, lard, molasses, spices, rolled thin and baked separately. Assembly was ceremony, each layer placed and spread with apple mixture. The cake sat for days, letting flavors meld into something slicing clean and tasting like autumn. In mountain communities, stack cake represented cooperation because neighbors often brought layers to celebrations. The finished cake stood tall, dark layers visible through golden apple filling. This represented mountain Christmas, patient, cooperative, deeply satisfying. Holiday ribbon salad layered color, flavor, and texture into one tall, shimmering dish that stood out in Betty Crocker Christmas cookbooks. Each layer used a different mixture of gelatin cream cheese fruit or whipped topping poured gently over the previous layer after it cooled just enough to hold its shape. The final result was a striped dessert that looked like a wrapped present sliced open at the table, revealing bright, cheerful bands of red, green, white, or pink grandparents made ribbon salad because it felt festive and show-stopping, even though the ingredients were inexpensive and widely available. It was chilled in loaf pans or ring molds, then unmolded onto lettuce or a serving tray dusted with coconut for extra sparkle. Kids loved its sweetness, adults loved its novelty, and hosts loved how it held together perfectly when sliced ribbon salads slowly disappeared as dessert trends shifted towards simpler baked treats. But in its time, this dish was a celebration centerpiece. It represented patience, creativity, and the belief that holiday meals deserved color and joy. Even if nobody makes it now, ribbon salad remains a bright memory of old Christmas tables that sparkled with intention and care. Cornflake Christmas wreaths were sticky, sweet, and green, the kind of treat that made every child's eyes light up in the 1960s. They were crafted from melted marshmallows, butter, and cornflakes, tinted with food coloring and dotted with tiny red candies. Simple, messy, and irresistible, these wreaths were a mother's quick solution for something festive without breaking the budget. Children shaped them by hand, their fingers coated in syrupy sugar, while laughter filled the kitchen. No one cared if they looked uneven or stuck to the wax paper. The fun was in the making. These little wreaths symbolized everything pure about mid-century Christmas joy, creativity, resourcefulness, and togetherness. They cooled on countertops, glistening like ornaments you could eat, waiting to be carried to school parties or shared after church. They might not appear on holiday tables today, replaced by sleek desserts and store-bought cookies, but their memory lingers like the sound of wrapping paper and carols. One bite could still take anyone back to the warmth of a simpler season. Buttercream frosted Yule log cakes were the Christmas dessert that required artistry and delivered woodland magic. Chocolate or vanilla sponge cake was baked thin, spread with buttercream or jam, then rolled into logs while still warm. Once cooled, the logs were frosted with chocolate buttercream textured with forks to resemble tree bark. Meringue mushrooms, marzipan holly, and powdered sugar snow completed the forest scene. The cake was light and creamy, the roll creating spirals when sliced that were beautiful and delicious. In French traditions adopted by American families, the Yule log represented ancient celebrations where actual logs were burned for luck. Making these cakes became a holiday ritual, with mothers teaching daughters how to roll without cracking. The finished logs were centerpieces on dessert tables, too pretty to cut, but too delicious to save. Today's simpler cakes miss the craftsmanship and imagination that made Yule logs genuine works of edible art representing Christmas magic. Cherry pineapple gelatin mold was one of the bright jewel-toned centerpieces found on mid-century Christmas tables, built from gelatin canned fruit and decorative molds. The mixture set into a scalloped ring that held cherries and pineapple pieces suspended like stained glass. It brought color to winter meals and added a sweet chilled side dish to balance heavier foods. This mold reflected a time when appearance was as important as flavor, and holiday tables were dressed in vivid colors. Eventually, gelatin salads faded from style, but this dish remains iconic within vintage Betty Crocker collections. It recalled an era when hospitality meant crafting something eye-catching even with inexpensive ingredients, and when molded salads were considered the height of festive creativity. The shimmer of fruit beneath the surface made every table look a little more cheerful. Divinity candy was the measure of a good cook's patience. One wrong move, too much humidity, a second too long on the stove, and the delicate meringue would collapse into a sticky mess. But when done right, Divinity was heaven itself. Airy, white, and kissed with vanilla, sometimes folded with nuts or coconut for texture. It was a candy that felt alive under your fingers, cooling into soft clouds that melted on the tongue. Making it was a holiday ritual, requiring timing, precision, and quiet concentration. Mothers and daughters would whisper over the pot, testing the syrup's readiness with practiced eyes. When the mixture reached perfection, it was spooned onto wax paper in little peaks, each one a triumph. Divinity was not flashy, but it carried a quiet grace, a symbol of the care and love poured into every Christmas kitchen. Today, few dare to attempt it, but those who do understand that the name was no exaggeration. Creamed pearl onions were a labor of love that few modern cooks would undertake, requiring patience to peel dozens of tiny onions before drowning them in velvety white sauce. Cooks blanched the pearl onions briefly, then slipped off papery skins one by one, a task often assigned to older children as their holiday contribution. The peeled onions were simmered in milk until tender, then folded into rich bechamel sauce seasoned with nutmeg and white pepper. The finished dish was creamy and mild, the sweetness of cooked onions mellowing into something almost buttery. Served in china bowls alongside the roast, creamed pearl onions added elegance to tables where everyday meals were simpler. Some families topped theirs with breadcrumbs and broiled them golden, adding textural contrast to the silky interior. The dish spoke of abundance and effort, qualities that defined holiday entertaining in an era when convenience foods were beginning to dominate. Today, the ritual of peeling has disappeared, along with the dish itself. Tom and Jerry was the hot cocktail that warmed Christmas gatherings when cold winds blew outside and families crowded into parlors and kitchens. The drink required its own special batter, a mixture of beaten eggs, sugar, spices, and sometimes rum that could be prepared ahead. When guests arrived, spoonfuls of batter went into special Tom and Jerry cups, followed by shots of brandy and rum, then hot milk to fill the cup. The drink was stirred quickly and topped with fresh nutmeg grated over the foam. Each sip delivered warmth, sweetness, and enough spirits to loosen conversation and laughter. Families owned dedicated Tom and Jerry bowl sets, often received as wedding gifts, that appeared only at Christmas. The ritual of making drinks became part of the celebration, with someone stationed at the bowl throughout the evening to serve arriving guests. Hotels and restaurants once offered Tom and Jerry during the holidays. Today, the drink has nearly vanished, remembered only by those who tasted its warming comfort. Rabbit fricassee graced Christmas tables in rural communities where wild game provided protein that store-bought meat could never match in freshness or economy. Hunters brought home rabbits throughout December, and the best were saved for holiday feasts. The rabbit was jointed and browned in bacon fat until golden, then braised in milk or cream with onions and herbs until the meat fell from the bones. The cooking liquid thickened into velvety gravy that coated every piece, served over biscuits or alongside mashed potatoes. Rabbit meat was lean and delicate, its mild flavor absorbing whatever seasonings the cook applied. Families who hunted their Christmas dinner understood the connection between land and table that store-bought food could never provide. Rabbit fricassee represented self-sufficiency, the ability to provide for family through skill rather than cash. The dish tasted of independence and the understanding that nature offered abundance. Creamed onions were the pearly white side dish that appeared in silver serving bowls at Christmas dinners across America, their mild sweetness balanced by rich bechamel. Small pearl onions were peeled by hand, a tedious job that left cooks weeping but yielded incomparable results. The onions were simmered until just tender, then folded into a sauce of butter, flour, cream, and sometimes a touch of nutmeg that coated each pearl in velvety richness. The finished dish looked almost like a dessert, the pale onions glistening in their creamy bath. Families passed the bowl around the table, spooning modest portions alongside roast beef or turkey. The flavor was subtle, the onions sweet and soft against the rich sauce. Making creamed onions from scratch required patience and skill, the sauce needing constant attention to prevent lumps. By the 1980s, frozen pearl onions and canned cream soups had replaced the handmade version, and eventually the dish vanished entirely from most Christmas tables. Which recipe do you wish Grandma had passed down to you? Share your treasured holiday memories in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another chance to bring Grandma's kitchen back to life.